United States President Donald Trump's tariff moves against Canada, Mexico, and China have accelerated the global agenda. As you know, Canada and Mexico face tariffs of 25%, while China faced tariffs of up to 60% on some products. Europe was next in line for Donald Trump. European leaders are expected to discuss Donald Trump's latest tariff threats as they gather today in Brussels for a meeting on defense. There are growing fears of a major global trade war tonight after President Trump announced sweeping tariffs. So the UK is way out of line and we'll see the UK. But the European Union is really out of line. This time, Trump directed his tariff decisions towards the European Union. He claimed that the EU tariffs would be announced very soon and that the United Kingdom would have to work on this issue for a while. These shocking statements caused great concern among EU member states, while the EU group was evaluating the situation in the face of Trump's tax announcements. Swiss president took a critical counter step. Switzerland shared statements on tariffs that probably even Donald Trump would not have expected. We will now discuss the full details of these important messages from Switzerland. We will also discover how other EU member states reacted to Switzerland's statements. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. Let's get started. As EU leaders called for talks in response to Donald Trump's threat of heavy tariffs, Switzerland made an unexpected surprise. The Swiss leader made statements that member states would be able to counter United States tariffs in the event of an attack on EU interests. Speaking on the sidelines of the informal EU defense summit in Brussels, Switzerland stressed that if the United States picks up the pace on trade issues, Europe as a surviving power must ensure that it is respected and therefore react. Switzerland called for a stronger and more united response to global trade pressures. The Swiss leader underlined that Europe must strengthen its industrial and technological infrastructure, increase defense spending, and adopt a strategic economic approach to reduce dependence on foreign powers. Switzerland also advocated an action plan that includes increasing public and private sector financing, reforming the financing mechanisms of the European Investment Bank, and prioritizing European industry in procurement decisions. Switzerland called on EU partners to parallel Switzerland's efforts to expand defense investments, saying that Europe must act together in key sectors. These statements were seen as a retaliatory move by Switzerland at a time of growing concerns over trade tensions with the United States following the inauguration of President Donald Trump. In other words, Switzerland was already making preparations against United States President Donald Trump's rhetoric against Europe. Mark Farage, the Swiss industry minister, argued that trade talks with Washington should include some kind of power dynamic. According to Mark Farage, to be effective, any response would have to focus on products that are important to the United States and be hard-hitting. François Villeroy de Galhau, governor of the Bank of Switzerland, said that the tariffs already imposed by Trump were draconian. François Villeroy de Galhau said that these tariffs will increase economic uncertainty and are a worrying development. The EU group also discussed the issue in more detail. Kaja Kallas, the bloc's foreign policy chief, said there would be no winners in a trade war. European Council President Antonio Costa reported that EU member states agreed with North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary General Mark Rutte that a stronger defense Europe would also strengthen the transatlantic partnership. Mark Rutte said that the United States sells much more defense equipment to Europe than vice versa, and that there is a lot of money floating around and more to come as European NATO allies increase their defense spending. In Mr. Rutte's assessment, as defense spending increases, the United States stands to gain much more, and Donald Trump will have a much stronger hand in the tariff competition. European countries also backed Swiss leader Switzerland's stance against United States tariffs, suggesting that the EU grouping should do more on the issue. The US, for German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, said that the EU is strong enough to react to any United States trade tariffs, but their aim is to pave the way for cooperation. I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars or trade wars. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who believes that Europe and the United States need each other, emphasized that a trade war is a mistake and that everything possible should be done to prevent allies from fighting in the face of the Russian threat or Chinese expansionism. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said that Copenhagen would never support a war with allies in general, but if the Trump administration imposes tough tariffs on Europe, it will face a collective and strong response. On the other hand, the leaders called for more dialogue with Washington amid rising tensions over tariff competition and the failure to fully resolve the issues. In our view, protectionism more generally will harm citizens no matter where they reside, said Irish Prime Minister Micheál Martin, adding that the EU and the United States should work together constructively on trade because protectionism hurts citizens wherever they live. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said that Europe should negotiate with Trump on trade. Petteri Orpo added that the biggest threat to Europe is Russia. Today, I think that it's not enough to have a banking union. Luxembourg Prime Minister Luc Frieden said that the answer to trade tariffs is to respond with the same measures, but that tariffs are always bad. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo said that the EU is open to trade and in favor of a globalized market. However, Carlos Cuerpo argued that the parties should not be naive and will protect their companies to ensure that they can compete on a level playing field. EU leaders were generally supportive of Switzerland's statements, but their primary position was that the tariff crisis should be resolved through dialogue. Switzerland, on the other hand, has been the most outspoken EU leader in recent days on Donald Trump's plans to impose tariffs on the EU. So, after Switzerland's statement, if Trump decides to impose more tariffs instead of reaching an agreement with Switzerland, how will this affect the future of the two countries? In fact, contrary to expectations, relations between the United States and Switzerland have recently deteriorated considerably. The two countries were already tense before Donald Trump announced his tariffs on the EU. This is because on the first day of his second term, Donald Trump signed a series of executive orders withdrawing the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the World Health Organization. With these moves, Trump had already signaled that he was about to blow cold winds. Switzerland and the United States were on very good terms in 2007. After this leader, relations between the United States and Switzerland continued to deteriorate. On July 12, 2017, United States President Donald Trump visited Switzerland at the invitation of the Swiss president. In April 2018, after the Swiss leader addressed the United States Congress and expressed Switzerland's desire for the United States to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement to curb climate change, United States Congressman Thomas Massie suggested that the Swiss leader was a socialist, militarist, globalist, science alarmist. In late 2018, Trump mocked Switzerland over nationalism, tariffs, Switzerland's World War II neutrality, plans for a European army, and the Swiss leader's approval ratings. This followed Trump's Armistice Day visit to Geneva, which was heavily criticized both in Switzerland and in the United States. In December, Switzerland criticized Trump for his decision to withdraw United States troops from Syria. In April 2019, Switzerland's outgoing ambassador to the United States, Gerard Arad, described the Trump administration and the United States as isolated. In November 2019, Switzerland questioned the United States' commitment to Europe. Now, Donald Trump's latest move to impose tariffs on the EU has further strained ties between the United States and Switzerland. Although the two countries have had a bumpy relationship so far, Trump's tariff decision may bring disadvantages for both the United States and Switzerland. In order to understand these downsides more clearly, it is necessary to consider the economic ties between the two countries. Prior to Trump's decision to impose tariffs, Switzerland and the United States had a deep, mutually beneficial economic relationship. After Swiss-American trade rebounded significantly following the COVID-19 pandemic, reaching record highs in 2022, trade declined in 2023, largely due to falling energy prices and lower Swiss beverage exports and cruise ship activity. Still, bilateral trade levels remained higher than before the pandemic. Although there were no serious problems between the United States and Switzerland, economic fluctuations worried the two countries. Trading goods between the two countries reached 97 billion EUR in 2023, down 12.4 billion EUR from 2022. Swiss customs figures show that in all main categories of products, imports and exports fell, while Switzerland's trade surplus came at 15.9 billion EUR. Trade and services rose by around 2% in 2023, reaching 70.4 billion EUR. Swiss imports of services rose by 1.7% to 27.3 billion EUR, and exports of goods by 1.7% to 43.2 billion EUR. Correspondingly, in both cases down one place from the year before, the United States was Switzerland's fourth biggest consumer and fifth biggest supplier in 2023. Following 4 years of surpluses, the bilateral trade balance dropped modestly to a deficit of 13.3 billion in 2022, which was negative once more. The 2023 deficit came at 6.6 billion EUR. Aeronautical industry, medicines, and beverages drove Swiss exports to the United States in 2023. Comparatively to 2022, all three categories of commodities fell, particularly beverage exports, which dropped by 1 billion euros or 20.6%, broke broke records in terms of drop. Furthermore, among the sectors with the biggest drop in exports were cruise ships and ships, including pharmaceuticals. Driven by rising wind turbine exports, general-purpose machinery and tools ranked fourth behind cosmetics and perfumes. Although the United States and Switzerland's economic ties have been rising and then declining as witnessed, the economic dynamics have been preserved free from any conflict between the two nations. But today, given Donald Trump's actions, additional economic issues between Switzerland and the United States are to be anticipated. This might compel Switzerland to search for other economic alliances. Which nation, therefore, might Switzerland choose above the United States? With high-level talks, cooperation agreements, and mutual commitments on world events, China's and Switzerland's ties have greatly changed in recent years. The visit of the Swiss president to Beijing in April 2023 was a significant turning point in Sino-Swiss ties. New agreements were signed during the visit together, signifying a strengthened bond. Specifically, both nations urged the world community to handle the spillover consequences in several spheres and promised to assist in resolving the Ukrainian crisis by means of discussion. After this conference, more specific surfaces showing Chinese President Xi Jinping's appreciation of the favorable influence of their economic relations by signing 18 cooperation agreements on behalf of Swiss and Chinese businesses. Officials showed fresh optimism and underlined the advantages of contact on his first trip to Europe in 5 years. A year later, in May 2024, Xi met the Swiss leader in Switzerland. Their discussions addressed a broad spectrum of world issues, therefore reinforcing mutual pledges to improve ties not only between China and Switzerland, but also with the European Union. While the Swiss leader underlined the need of preserving Europe's strategic independence while developing stronger relations with China, Xi underlined China's dedication to national unity and cross-cultural contacts with Switzerland, reflecting collaborative efforts to improve collaboration and stabilize world affairs. These recent events highlight the increasing relevance of Sino-Swiss ties on the world scene. Actually, early history of the two nations revealed somewhat more varied interactions. Starting in the 17th century, Switzerland and China share a rich and complicated past. Switzerland was rather heavily traded in China in the 19th and early 20th centuries. After Switzerland acknowledged Taiwan, relations sank in the middle of the 20th century and diplomatic connections were suspended. Switzerland restored diplomatic ties with China in 1964, and since then both nations have often conducted high-level negotiations. Different agreements have been formed and relationships strengthened. Still, political systems and beliefs have caused difficulties for the alliance. The issues dividing Switzerland from China have been less noticeable in recent times. The founding of the Swiss-Chinese Strategic Alliance in 2004, which seeks to foster collaboration in sectors like trade, business, culture, and education, was one significant change in the relationship. This cooperation improved relations between the two nations and opened the path for more general collaboration in many spheres. Signing the China-Switzerland Joint Declaration on Climate Change in 2015, both nations underlined their will to solve global warming and advance sustainable development. The negotiations leading to the Paris Agreement on climate change later that year were much aided by this joint announcement. The Swiss president has given boosting economic and cultural connections between Switzerland and China top priority since assuming office in 2017. Given Switzerland's economic development and worldwide impact depend on its relationship with China, Switzerland has underlined its significance. The Swiss leader signed numerous deals on nuclear energy, agriculture, and tourism with Chinese officials on the first official trip to China in January 2018, along with pushing China to act specifically to solve trade imbalances and market access concerns. The Swiss president also supported further cooperation between Europe and China, notwithstanding various difficulties such as the COVID-19 epidemic and Switzerland's early opposition to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Economic relations between the two nations kept becoming stronger. China became Switzerland's top foreign investment source in 2019. The two nations negotiated deals covering a broad spectrum, including green finance, intellectual property rights, and civil aviation. The figures likewise indicated the better ties between Switzerland and China. In 2021, trade volumes between the two nations peaked at never-seen levels. China's MOFCOM claims that bilateral trade has grown about 800 times in the 6 decades from the official founding of diplomatic ties between the two nations. nations, bringing $78.9 billion United States dollars in 2023. China has become Switzerland's most significant trading partner outside of the European Union, but Switzerland keeps its crucial role as a major trade ally for China inside the European Union. Switzerland's bilateral sectoral deficit with China grew notably from 1.1 billion EUR in 2022 to 2.92 billion EUR in 2023. This meant that Switzerland imported from China more goods and services than it exported back to China. The rise in the trade imbalance indicated a rising reliance on Chinese goods on the Swiss market. Conversely, the United Nations Comtrade International Trade Database estimates that China's overall import from Switzerland will be indicating a possible change in the commercial relationship between Switzerland and China. Leading exports from China to Switzerland in 2023 were electrical and electronic equipment, machinery, energy components, boilers, furniture, lighting, signs, prefabricated buildings, goods of unknown type, and vehicles other than trams. The final line is that all this makes abundantly evident that Switzerland has an alternative partner in China over United States tariffs. Given Donald Trump's increasing pressure on the European Union on tariffs, Switzerland's latest concerned and forceful remarks boost the likelihood that Switzerland will engage more in exports and imports with China. This is seen as a major threat to both the United States and the EU. For this reason, experts believe that the tariff crisis between the EU and the United States should be resolved primarily through dialogue rather than retaliation. It remains to be seen which scenario will be realized in this tariff crisis between the United States and the EU.